Hello and welcome to our panel. It will be on betting on Canada, and we're extremely excited to share some information and some insights with you today. So we're quite a large panel, 5. We'll be providing great stuff for you. So please let me kick off by introducing all 5 panelists, please. So, well, and of course, I'm a modest person, but I just need to tell you, I'm Brigitte Sand, and I have a role as a commercial iGaming lead for the project going on in Ontario right now, and I'm the former general director for the Danish Gambling Authority. But most importantly, I'm the moderator today, and so please allow me to introduce to you Stan Cho on your waving. That's a good way. Parliamentary assistant to the Minister of Finance in Ontario and Member of Parliament for Willowdale as well. Then we also have the pleasure of Benji Levy. Can I get a wave? Yes. President and COO of Score Media and Gaming. Then we have Shelley White with us, CEO for the Responsible Gambling Council of Ontario. So welcome to you as well. We have the pleasure of having Paul Burns with us, President and CEO of the Canadian Gaming Association. And we finally have Ron, can I get a wave again? Ron Seagav, founder of the law firm Seagav LLP. So there we are. So I believe it would be nice perhaps to have some background to kick off our panel. So please, perhaps Stan, would you share with us what has been happening in Ontario so far in relation to iGaming? It's a huge question, but I leave it up to you.
Well, thank you so much, Brigitte, for that kind introduction. And thank you to everybody for joining us this afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Stan Cho, as Brigitte mentioned, and I'm the Parliamentary Assistant to the Minister of Finance, and I've been asked to oversee the development of Ontario's Internet Gaming Framework. Our province is aware of the popularity of the grey market of gaming operations here in Ontario, and I've heard estimates ranging from the market being worth between $500 million to $1 billion in our province. And players who have or operate or play within the grey market, there are some concerns. They don't have access to responsible gaming measures, integrity protocols, or other protections that come in a regulated sector. And so that's why a few years ago in 2019, our government announced its intention to establish a legal iGaming framework for Ontario players to participate in a safe and regulated environment. An important component of Ontario's new iGaming market will be sports betting, and so we are watching very carefully as Bill C-218 is currently being debated in the Senate. Bill C-218 is, of course, the federal bill to change the Canadian Criminal Code to legalize single-event sports betting, and that is currently under consideration in committee in the Senate. The passage of Bill C-218 would help ensure that Ontario captures the popular grey market activity, and we know that single-event sports wagering is a crucial offering for operators interested in participating in Ontario's market. We are continuously advocating for the passage of Bill C-218 in anticipation of the opening of Ontario's iGaming market. Over the past few months, we've had many discussions, over 30 discussion sessions, and I know Brigitte has been hard at work having many discussions of her own. And these chats have been with a broad representation across different sectors, including iGaming operators, land-based gaming, charitable gaming entities, responsible gaming, responsible gambling, and of course our First Nations organizations as well. Now, we've heard from participants all over the world, including Europe, the United States, and Canada, with experiences in many existing regulated markets. So to conclude our discussion sessions, we held an online information session to summarize the feedback. And remarkably, we had over 100 attendees tune in to listen to the findings of our engagement sessions. all of this helpful information is feeding into our policy development process, and a lot of work is underway with the hopes of confirming policy approvals in summer months and registration for interested operators and suppliers targeted for the fall and market launch by the end of the year. So while the cement is not dry, we are currently mixing it, and we look forward to the discussion today. So that's sort of where we stand for now, and I'll throw it back to you, Brigitte.
Thank you so very much, Stan. That was a lot of information in a very short time, but I think we should be grateful to get this overview before we get on with the discussion. So thank you very much, Stan. And then turning to you, Paul. So all this development just described to all of us, what does that actually mean for the land-based sector, gaming sector in Ontario? What kind of opportunities do you foresee?
Well, what it does mean for the 5 casino operators in the province of Ontario is that they can now have a level playing field. They've not had access to online platforms. They have been out of this market, out of the online market, in the last 15 months, predominantly closed because of the pandemic. So at this point in time, it's a bit, they didn't have any online product to fall back to at this point in time. And so for them, it's a real opportunity to create that omni-channel experience from that customer from inside and outside the property. I think it's they need to make sure that they're put on that level playing field, that they're not disadvantaged going into the market. They're a very critical point right now, ensuring that they need to have all of their make sure there's no more impediments between other current agreements they have with the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corp. From the regulator to make sure that they can create those partnerships that they want to look for with sports betting operators or building their online platforms in partnership with others. That's critical to get done now because they want to get ready for when that market opens, because as we've seen, the gray market's pretty strong in Ontario and they're already there. And while because casinos have a great customer bases, strong business, they do need to be able to get ready for that market opening. And so that's really the chance for them, is to leverage their current customer base, build that loyalty through their current brands and offerings for both inside and outside the property. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity, as you've seen the trend across North America and the world, for land-based operators to be able to build those omni-channel experiences, seamless guest experience. It's extremely important. So it's great for them and a great opportunity. It comes at a very good time.
So Paul, is there any obstacles out there that you sort of like focus on that worries you, or does it all look bright and easy?
No, listen, we've been supporting and encouraging the government of Ontario to regulate the online gaming market for a long time. The association has been clear in its position from back in the 2000s that the online gaming needs to be regulated in Canada. And we're grateful the province of Ontario has seen it. We think it is definitely the right direction to create that level playing field for operations within the country, but also to ensure that the strong network and framework of consumer protection regulation that have been put in place from the land-based operations now can apply to the online space. We know that a lot of Ontarians, a lot of Canadians don't know that a lot of these offshore aren't legal and they're not regulated. We get calls in our office from people who are having problems getting their money out, or their accounts get closed arbitrarily, and they have very little recourse depending on where those sites are licensed. And so that's the point. That comes with this, is being able to the value of creating this regulated marketplace. And there's so many benefits to come. I mean, I know we're going to speak more about them going forward, but there really is a lot of upside from doing this, and we're really encouraged. And that's why we've been working closely with finance and the AGCO, the regulator in Ontario, to make this happen.
Great. Thank you very much, Paul. So turning to you, Benji. So please tell us a little bit about, you have already established your business in the US market. So what would be the biggest priorities for a government in Ontario to focus on to make absolutely sure that this new venture, this iGaming market, will actually succeed in your view?
Yeah, listen, and thanks for having us on the panel today, Brigitte. It's a very exciting time for iGaming in in Ontario and in Canada. Stan mentioned, we're watching the progress of C218 very, very closely and are very excited by where that's at. Listen, I think in terms of being a media company and an operator who's live in the United States and is looking very forward to kind of launching at home on our home turf. For us, it's about market readiness and readiness to launch, and that's understanding what the regulations are going to be and the rules of the road, relating to things like know your customer and payment processing, what Ontario's approach to responsible gaming and self-exclusion, and all of those elements, which we all generally understand at a macro level, but each jurisdiction takes their own slightly different approach, which has has impacts to how systems are developed, and that has implications from a software perspective, and how you actually ready your platform for market launch. And I think one of the good things about where we're at in Ontario is this isn't new. This is not something that legislation has been passed and then regulations are being tossed together and trying to open a market in 60 days. This is Ontario kind of first planted their flag on this in the spring of 2019 and said, look, we recognize we have a challenge with the gray market. We recognize that this is a massive opportunity for the province. And there's been this ongoing process of consultation and study over more than a year and a half, where Ontario's had the ability to engage with stakeholders and also look to framework. We're not reinventing the wheel here. There are lots of online gaming jurisdictions, not just in Europe, but now in North America, where there's a track record of successful regulation, where you can look at what works, what doesn't work, how do you take what's working elsewhere and adapt that for what's going to be a slightly unique framework in Ontario, where we're not dealing with kind of a straight licensure, but a conduct and manage framework. So that's all been going in our view very, very well, and happening in a very orderly process. So for us, it's about, as these kind of consultations and the framework pieces are rolling out over the course of the summer, understanding exactly where everything settles with respect to these elements, and then giving operators like us the time to implement the regulations for their systems and move forward.
Right. Thank you so much, Benji. So I think we need to turn to Shelley White now, because is there any downsides here, or is it all looking really good? Or do you worry about responsible gambling, or would you have some good advice, surely, what to focus on now that the iGaming market will open up?
Thank you very much, Brigitte. Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. So great question, Brigitte. So RGC's been thinking about this a lot since the government announced that it was going to look at the expansion of online gambling, and been working with the government and the regulator and operators and other stakeholders. Ontario has a very strong commitment to consumer protection. That's the good news. And we know that responsible gambling works best when the government, operators, regulators, the game and equipment manufacturers, the RG experts, treatment and support organizations of the public all work collaboratively to bring to the table their respective knowledge, skills, and expertise to implement a stronger, safer gambling environment. And fortunately, in Ontario, we have an incredibly strong responsible gambling framework in place. And with all of these stakeholders working together, the future's promising. However, I just want to caution, the caution would be, currently AGCO, which is the regulator in Ontario, is working on finalizing an evidence-based set of iGaming standards to focus on the unique aspects of iGaming. There's going to be a lot of new operators coming into the Ontario market, and it's absolutely essential that each one of those new regulators has a strong commitment to RG right from the top, and that RG is integrated into their strategy. Secondly, there's going to be a lot of new players coming into the market. And, we have a very, very strong commitment in Ontario and Canada to social responsibility. We take a public health approach to preventing problem gambling. We want to prevent gambling harms in this country and in this province. And so it's really important that all employees of all the various operators receive great RG training, and that all the frontline operators are trained and feel equipped to assist players. The sites should include information for players about how the games work and what the odds are. And, there's a myriad of really effective RG tools that are available in other jurisdictions. We should be adopting all of those RG tools as well, so that players have every opportunity to manage their time and money limits. Marketing and advertising standards should be designed to protect underage youth as well as vulnerable individuals, with a particular focus, I think, on the risks associated with direct online marketing. And I would also say that it's important that there's play pause features as well as access and self-exclusion and play pause are actively promoted as well. Two other points, key to RG, it's incumbent upon all of us to ensure that there's appropriate funding earmarked for research, prevention, education, early detection, treatment, and support. And lastly, that third-party accreditation exists to provide us all with that assurance that there's good excellent RG programs, highest standard RG programs in place. And that accreditation program, like RG Check, also can be a valuable tool in providing insights into continuous improvement.
Well, I would say you know exactly what you want. So thank you very much, Shelley. And then turning to Ron. So please, from your vast experience in advising on gambling, not only in Ontario, but throughout Canada and beyond, what kind of opportunities do you see in a bit larger perspective than only Ontario, and what can Ontario provide when they sort of like will become the first mover on this issue? What do you see in sort of in the future opportunities for anyone?
Thank you, Brigitte, and good morning, everyone from Vancouver. It's a pleasure to be here, and a real pleasure to be here with such a top-tier panel. I think the bigger opportunity is the reverse brain drain story. So, in 96, 97, when online gaming started coming to market, the major innovator in the industry was Canada. Unfortunately, we didn't have the regulatory infrastructure to support that nascent industry, and a lot of the best and brightest in that industry had to leave Canada. Many of them went to the UK, many of them went to Malta, and so forth, and they seeded those local thriving industries. And I think that's a real unfortunate loss for us. The fact that, what is essentially a highly regulated e-commerce industry was governed under a criminal code regime, resulted in economic loss to the country.
Ron, could you just share with us criminal code regime?
Sure, yeah. So the Canada's gaming and betting law is found in Part 7 of the Criminal Code. So most countries, like the UK, for example, will have a UK Gambling Act, which governs the industry. Our gaming industry is governed by criminal code provisions, and it doesn't really allow for a flourishing industry. And so what happened was we had this brain drain out of the country in this industry. And the players that remained in country were very much constrained by the regs, by the province's respective gaming control acts, by the federal legislation, and honestly just couldn't meet their full potentials. So what I'm really excited about is, onshoring our talent, and then also fostering a new breed of innovator in the space. My law firm works with, everything from, first mover to Fortune 500. And it's those first movers that generally are excluded from the market here because they don't have the money to go offshore and get a license and, or quite frankly, to, get the tax advice or the legal advice or what have you. I think this is a phenomenal opportunity for the province of Ontario to start fostering a local gaming, betting, sports media, sports entertainment, data analytics industry around this whole space in a regulated environment with predictability, foreseeability, with the regulators here. Hopefully the regulator will understand that, the go live date, the work isn't done. Certainly the regulator gets that the industry is going to be very dynamic, that the regulatory sands will shift, and it's going to be critically important that they interface with the industry to make sure that innovation isn't stifled, right, on an ongoing basis.
Right.
I'm very excited for that, to be able to tell my clients, no, stay here. There's a regime for you, and we can do some great things internationally.
Right. Thank you very much, Ron. And I believe that this was sort of like the first round where everybody could get to know you a little bit better, listen in on your vast experience, each from your platform. So turning back to Stan, please, would you share with us a little bit more about what have the government done today? Really, a little bit more detail on some of the things that has happened?
Yeah,
Please?
sure, Brigitte, thank you. And sorry, Ron, I forgot to say hi to my friends on the West Coast. Good morning to all of you joining us out there as well. So I mentioned earlier that the cement isn't dry, but we're sort of mixing those ingredients. And so what are those ingredients? Well, I think the first one was that back in March, our province posted a discussion paper on Ontario's iGaming framework for public feedback. And since then, we've had, I'm telling you, tremendous response from industry stakeholders, partners, everybody who's interested in engaging on the future of Ontario's iGaming market. And the general public, of course, was included in this, and they submitted their written responses on paper by April 16th. And this was in addition to the 30 individual discussions that Brigitte had, that I had, and we received almost 70 responses during the submission period. The written submissions that we received emphasized, of course, numerous times the importance of single event sports wagering and product choice to meet consumer demand. In addition, the issue of pooled liquidity came up both across Canada and internationally as an important feature of the future market for many participants. Submissions also stressed the importance of commercial viability, knowing that a balance needs to be struck between costs for operators to participate and the government's establishment of a regulated market. And so as we continue to develop the key iGaming parameters, this is insight that will be very helpful in sort of formulating our plan as we move through in creating that framework. And finally, the perhaps most important piece, the ingredient, if you will, we were really heartened to see the overwhelming feedback in support of responsible gambling measures. This is hugely important to me. We've all heard anecdotally the horror stories in gray market of the individual who had a problem with gambling and reached out for help and was redirected to Lithuania or somewhere that, we just can't get that help to that individual. And so we are super appreciative that the operators and partners and the public were supportive in developing strong, responsible, and protective measures in place for Ontario players, because that really is priority number one as we move into this market. So that's sort of a high-level update of the progress that's been made so far.
Thank you so much, Stan. Could you share with us a little bit, because some of us have heard about an upcoming subsidiary in AGCO. What is that? Could you share with us a little bit about what are they going to do?
Sure. So the question, So
what approach would the government be taking towards the new iGaming market? As I believe there will be a subsidiary established too, and I think everybody's very keen to hear more about what is that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And our province is taking an approach to create this market, as I mentioned, choice, protection measures, and market growth and returns for operators. But we also want to operate in an environment with less red tape. Of course, this needs to be a balanced approach to ensure that an attractive market for operators and consumers. Otherwise, you're not going to combat the gray market. And one of the key parts to creating these conditions is through the conduct and manage piece. In our last budget tabled November of 2020, we announced that in addition to regulating Ontario's existing gaming market, the AGCO would establish a new subsidiary, as you mentioned, to conduct and manage the new iGaming market in accordance with the law. So the OLG would continue to conduct and manage OLG.ca. The AGCO registrar's regulatory role that will remain unchanged and entirely separate from the AGCO subsidiary commercial role in conducting and managing iGaming. In parallel to the engagements led by the government, the AGCO also launched the iGaming engagement portal to host a series of stakeholder engagements on key technical and operational components of the new iGaming framework. We, of course, understand that tax and license approach for gaming registration and revenue collection is common practice in other jurisdictions, as we've heard from many operators, and you've mentioned several times, Brigitte. That's, of course, outside of Canada with established legal online gaming markets. But it's important to note that the Criminal Code of Canada requires that online gambling must be conducted and managed by the province. That's a requirement that necessitates a higher level of involvement by the province than a tax and license scheme for participation. So what we're doing in Ontario is that interested operators are required to register with the AGCO and enter into a commercial agreement with the AGCO's iGaming subsidiary to participate in Ontario's iGaming market. Having said that, we're seeking to develop an iGaming framework that will be balanced, and we understand that need for competitive and accessible market with the private sector operators, with the need for compliance with the Criminal Code's gaming provisions. And that balance, of course, also will include as light a touch as possible in the framework to make sure that government doesn't get too much in the way or create more of a thing, which is lasting news.
Thank you so much, Stan, for all this information. Really interesting to understand. So now I think perhaps it would be great to hear from the other panelists. Do you have any comments to what we just heard from Stan? Is there anything here? It's my impression that industry has obviously tried to understand what is this conduct and managed and worry a little bit about it or not. So do you have any views on this with having an account with AGCO subsidiary? Is that okay, easy to understand, easy to approach? Any view?
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts. Stan had talked about two aspects of the opening Ontario market. So one of them was having a competitive market by way of a relatively low barrier to entry, and then having a competitive market by way of a relatively low operating cost or ease of doing business. But there's a third component that my clients are still wondering about, and that's preserving the value of the market by way of an enforcement policy. And frankly, usually a panelist is here to have the answers, but I don't. I have the question. We just don't know what the enforcement policy is going to look like. The province of Ontario does not have jurisdiction to enforce extraterritorially, and many of my clients just don't know how that's going to play out. I'm not, I don't mean to put Stan on the spot, but if there are any insights that the panelists have, I'd love to hear on that.
Right. Thank you very much, Ron. I think perhaps we should hear from Paul, because I can see you're keen. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I agree with Ron. There is some making this approach that the government has taken a focus on not interrupting the consumer experience and what they've had to experience today, to bring in an appropriate level of regulation, building off the best practices around the world. There are some nuances that we don't have a tax, right? That's the law doesn't permit, so it's a revenue share agreement. And those need to be at the appropriate levels. I'll put in my plug for Benji here too, a lower level for sports than gaming. But they also need to ensure that they don't create oversight for the sake of oversight. Conduct and manage is often misunderstood, even in Canada, to be frank. There's a number of interpretations being used across the country by different provincial governments. And oftentimes, and not to disparage lawyers, but sometimes they look at, or government lawyers.
Be careful now, Paul.
In this case, that you have to look at the whole framework. And when you look at the whole framework, there will be a very robust oversight model put in place. There will be a relationship, so there is the revenue can be the appropriate revenue share model that the province wants, but not an onerous, overburdened kind of integrated relationship with extra measures for the sake of having extra measures. because you understand the nature of what iGaming is, and you all know, right? You're not anonymous. There's a continuous trail. There's ability to provide reams and reams of data to regulators to provide oversight and protection for consumers and governments and all of those things. And we need to have that perspective. And sometimes that's, trying to take a law that was written back in the 60s and trying to say, okay, let's make this work for this. It has its challenges. And that's where, what we've been trying to support the government in that regard is to say, we need to take new interpretations of this and broad ones that are more relevant to today, that actually don't penalize Ontario marketplace for simply wanting to do this. I don't believe they should be keeping people out of the rest of Canada because Ontario is not the country's policeman for online gaming. That's not their responsibility. Their responsibility is for the province of Ontario. And if any other province chose to do it, I don't think they'd want to be the policeman for the country either when it came to iGaming. And I think those are the kinds of things that we need to make sure that we can that create a framework that allow, and then the appropriate level to Ron's point. Mm-hmm. Protecting the enforcement and value of license is key, because a lot of people are coming into this market and saying, hey, you haven't done a very good job at keeping anybody out because there has been no enforcement. So what are you going to do? And I think that's where the regulatory framework can come in place, is act as a deterrent, I guess is another word to enforcement, but ensuring that value of license. And that's some of the things we've been talking about as an association when it comes to how they deal with geolocation services, payment providers, other things like that, where how can you find creating the right touch of regulatory oversight that provides enough deterrent to say to a grand market, it's really going to be frustrating to operate here, so I'm not. And then the enforcement piece can follow behind that, but you have to make sure you create a framework and a market that everybody wants to join first, and then and understand you work it later. And I know you all are working on this, but those are some of the important pieces, because it'll be easy for people to say, I'm not going to join. Like if I see enough barrier.
Well, don't say that aloud, Paul.
I mean, I must say though, Paul, I do, not to take issue with my friend Mr. Burns, but our approach, is that holding a gaming license in any jurisdiction that we operate is a privilege. It's not a right. A big component to that is, when regulators are examining us and they're speaking to us and they're interviewing us and they're asking me for 20 years of background information, and I appreciate that Ontario hopefully might be a bit of a lighter touch than that, but that's the type of diligence that some of these regulatory agencies do on us, in some jurisdictions in the United States. And integrity matters a great deal. And, it's important to many regulators, to say, listen, I want to come into this market and I'm going to follow the rules of the road in this market, but I'm not going to follow the rules of the road in another jurisdiction. Well, I agree, it's not necessarily the job of an individual jurisdiction to police another jurisdiction. It certainly is in the ambit of a regulator to say, to look at the totality of that operator's operations, and to say, is this a good and responsible operator, and is this somebody who we should be bringing in? And I certainly understand there's a great incentive to bring the gray market operators into the light in Ontario. I wholly support that. I can't wait to compete with them. I welcome them to our, to come and compete in our backyard in a regulated way. But at the same time, if I, as an Ontario resident, did some of the things that they're doing, that would be challenging for me, to say the least. And so I think there has to be that balance there, where it might not just be enough to say, we're going to do, we care about what's happening here in Ontario, and then, BC is BC's problem. I think, it's got to be a balanced approach to make sure that the playing field, quite frankly, is level for everyone, because otherwise you're going to have this imbalance where certain operators are playing by effectively a different set of rules, and that can be, that can be a challenge.
Thank you, Benji. Love when you have a wholehearted way of expressing what you think. So thank you very much for that. I believe perhaps Stan, would you have any comments on the discussion so far?
Well, Brigitte, if I may, I think both Shelley and Ron put up their hand. I'd be
Yes.
interested to hear everyone's input, maybe
Yeah,
give the government.
perfect. So please, I believe it was Ron first.
Yeah, just using Benji's closing remarks here as a springboard in terms of the challenges that it would create. I think one major challenge that it would create if we had an Ontario market that it ignores unregulated activity in other provinces is it might be a barrier to the provinces sharing liquidity. You know, you can imagine that if Ontario turns a blind eye to what its registered operators are doing in an unregulated fashion in BC, Manitoba, Quebec, etc. You know, I would wonder if the provincial lottery corporations would get together and actually come up with pooled liquidity arrangements, which are critical to many game types. So I think they need to all get along. What that looks like, I'm not really sure. I also have to agree with Paul's comments that Ontario is not the cop for Canada. I'd also like to respectfully take issue with something that Benji said. I think that some of the best operators from an RG perspective, from a consumer protection perspective, from a game integrity perspective, are unregulated. That's not to say that they're unregulated, period. They're regulated in the UK, they're regulated in Jersey, in Malta, and it's, you know, arguably no fault of theirs that there wasn't a regulated B2C regime in Canada, and that arguably there was sort of a gray market space in the market and for them to operate. So I wouldn't necessarily paint them with a sort of nefarious brush. You know, many of these operators are best in class.
Right. Thank you so much, Ron. I think we're turning to Shelley now, please.
Yeah, just building on the other panelists' comments, I'd also like to suggest that, you know, right from the very beginning when Ontario started these conversations, there was a phrase that was used: we want to get this right. And we recognize that, you know, this is going to be new gambling activity, iGaming in Ontario, potentially single event sports wagering at the same time. And I think that in order to get it right, it's important that we measure and communicate the impact of the program, that we set goals and objectives. We evaluate, are we meeting those goals and objectives? Where are we succeeding? Where do we need to make changes in terms of enhancing what we're delivering? And, you know, the other piece is that the gambling industry is growing and diversifying and changing, as is technology. And I think this commitment to continuous improvement is so essential. And I think that, you know, using data, player data, having an ongoing research agenda, an evaluation agenda to ensure that we are getting it right and that we're building the best practice in Ontario is extremely important in terms of consumer protection.
Thank you, Shelley. I think that now we would like to hear Stan. You've got a lot of different views here and a lot of comments as well. So does it have to be perfect from the start?
Well, yeah, exactly. And thank you for letting me go last. I just wanted our viewers to sort of see the mix of opinions and the moving parts that understandably our government has to balance. And Shelley, I'm glad you brought up the get it right part, because we do. But will that be the first time around? Maybe not. In fact, likely not. As we've seen around the world, this is a complex issue. And as you said, Shelley, the data is changing constantly. In our meeting yesterday, I learned some very new information that we have to consider very carefully and adapt. So part of the framework we're going to have is, yes, we want those things I discussed earlier, not too much red tape, a balance, operate under the compliance of the criminal code, and keep in mind public health concerns. All those things are very important. But we also have to have the sort of built-in systems to change if it's not working. If something is not right, there has to be an exit ramp there as well. And so these are the balances we want. And I keep mentioning as light a touch as possible. We understand that an overly prescriptive system will keep operators from even trying. And this will only enable the gray market to continue. And that balance collectively of all these concerns that we're discussing on this panel today is not something that you can just predict and, in my opinion, put out there in black and white and say, we did it. Right? I think that would be arrogant. I think we need to learn from mistakes. I think we need to learn from other jurisdictions, and we need to keep the dialogue and the communication going even after we launch. And so that is my commitment, and I think that our government understands that there are more complexities than just simply opening the door and say, go ahead.
Thank you, Stan. So Paul, do you agree with Stan on this, that it's a complex task, this?
Oh, yeah.
Yes?
Oh, no. It is complex. I mean, understand what Ontario is trying to do. You have a very vibrant gray market operating within the jurisdiction with no jurisdiction-based regulation and no taxation. And then we're going to create something and we're going to ask you to sign up for it. You can't go over, you can't tax too high, you can't over-regulate. You have to find that balance. And it's unique, and that's where a lot of people that maybe listening came from the U.S. experience and tethered markets and things like that, and they've been complete greenfields because there's been a black and a white market in the United States. There's clear lines of what's illegal and illegal in many jurisdictions. That doesn't exist in Canada, and that's the challenge. And it's a challenge for the AGCO when they have to regulate a market they need to nurture and grow. They need to find those balances and work with operators, encouraging people into the market, the value of the license. So it's a very intricate balance that hasn't been experienced in other jurisdictions. And in my own opinion, it'll probably be the only open license market in North America when we're all said and done. And I think that's where there's a lot of other benefits that come with this to the province and to the country, frankly, by doing this. And that's where we're encouraged by this, but it is difficult. Let's be honest. And I mean, well, I'm saying not to be the policeman for the rest of every other province has this ability at their hand if they choose to take it. If you want to keep people out and not have any and let your lottery corporation have the dominant position, then set your tax rate at 50%. No one's coming. But you can still have the ability within your jurisdiction to create these rules, and everybody's had that ability. And they haven't chosen to take it. Ontario is taking the first step in the country, and they should be commended for that because they're actually trying to do it to bring and create a market that works in the jurisdiction.
Right. So there's something here to be proud of.
Very much so.
And for the record, Paul's the one who said 50% tax rate. That wasn't coming from the government.
We won't let you do that. We won't let you do that.
Just joking.
We promise.
So I have a question for you all. So we have one question here. It's complicated, but what isn't? So there's a good one here. With half of the country's population and many pro sports leagues operating in Ontario, it makes sense that Ontario welcomes competition. This has been touched on a little bit by Stan already, but with the licensor also being the current monopoly in small provinces and regions, where do other provinces, the Atlantic region, currently stand on competition? And how do we avoid a conflict of interest here? So that's a complex one. So Ron, you moved your face. So do you have the answer for that one, please?
No, I was just agreeing that it is a complex issue. Look, I'm in touch with the a gaming policy enforcement branch here in British Columbia, which is the office in charge of registering operators in our market. I'm in touch with BCLC, which is our provincial lottery corporation. And I've asked them, are you going to go the Ontario model? And they told me, no. Are they watching it? Yeah, of course they're watching it. The whole world's watching it. Does it mean that there's no room for cooperation in the way of shared liquidity or shared promotions or offerings or what have you? No, there's still room for it. Is it going to create a conflict of interest? Yeah, I think we touched on it. I can imagine BCLC might be frustrated if a Ontario registered operator is actively operating in BC. there are probably going to be some letters exchanged between the two regulators.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably going to be some discussions had, and I think that that's the complicated bit. The commercial bit, I think, we just get a few adults in the room and negotiate a deal. But and there's already precedent for that in the way of our national lottery products, and we used to have shared liquidity in poker and some other games. So there's precedent for it. But it's that, am I allowed as an offshore operator to stay in the rest of Canada and also be registered in Ontario? That's the big question.
Right.
And I should say that, currently under the draft standards that were released in April, Section 3 says that if you're registered, you cannot do business in another province unless it's with that other province. So, the implication there is that you can't be a gray market operator.
So, Shelley, back to you. So, do you feel confident that the responsible gambling will do just fine with the opening of this iGaming market? As you look at everything you know about Ontario and about Canada and about other ways in the rest of the world, really, do you have any considerations that something will be perfect from day one and something will have to just wait a little bit?
Brigitte, we've worked with AGCO and with the operators in Ontario for quite a few years. And knowing AGCO and their commitment to, having a robust regulatory framework, the fact that, there's an evaluation framework in place for the operators through RG Check in place, that there's a strong commitment to prevention, education, and information. I am confident that we're going to get it roughly right to start. But I think that it's going to be extremely important for all of us, all the stakeholders, to have a commitment to monitor this and ensure that it's the activity that iGaming is carried out in a way that we're all proud of, that it has the kind of integrity and protection and has sustainable play built into it. You don't know what you don't know until it actually is in place. It's going to be interesting to see what the impact is if, single event sports betting and iGaming happen to occur simultaneously, and that's launched simultaneously, and what kind of impact that might have, particularly on young adults. And I'm thinking particularly of young men, 18 to 24, or, adult males, 25 to 44, who love watching sports and who are also—
I see some men here nodding. Yeah.
Yes, and who could simultaneously be, maybe drinking some beer or imbibing in cannabis while they're watching. And, how are we going to ensure that there's, good safeguards in place so that they can the entertainment experience that we want it to be, and that there is sustainable play. So I think that there's really good bones in place, to be honest. Right. And that Ontario is a leader, and because of our public health approach, because of our commitment to social responsibility, like I said, I think there's good bones in place. But I think that it's something, because it's so new and because there's going to be so many operators coming in from other jurisdictions, and it's going to be quite a diverse group, that we just need to ensure that there's really careful evaluation by all of us together collaboratively, especially for the first 3-4 years.
So another question for all of you. So is it right to say the more the merrier, in the sense that the more interest that are shown to receive a commercial contract with Ontario, would that be a good thing for the market to attract as many as possible? I do know that there are no plans to put a limit on the number of agreements. So do you expect that to be a good thing, that the more operators attracted to this legal opportunity, the better, also for consumers?
I mean, I can jump in here, Brigitte. From our perspective, competition keeps everybody sharp, and ultimately, at the end of the day, in our view, leads to the best outcome for consumers. Because our view is you have to put the user first. And you have to earn their business every day, and that starts from creating a product that's innovative and that they actively choose to use. and I think to Shelley's point, look, everybody has to come into the market with the same set of expectations from a responsible gaming perspective, from a know your customer perspective, from a source of funds, and really ingrain, have a culture of responsibility and compliance built into everything you do, and that's kind of the base level. But how you build from there, you create innovative consumer-facing products that are entertainment-led. This is meant to be entertainment, and and to Ron's point earlier, by having that level of competition in the market, I think is what unleashes that innovation and creativity and creates jobs. We are 300 people strong at the Score in Ontario. I wish Stan had saw fit to say we're going to create a fast lane for people who have 300 plus employees in the province. Ultimately, we didn't go in that direction. We can live with that. But that headcount is going to grow, and it's going to be high-paying jobs in software engineering and product development, and data science and data analytics to create these amazing consumer-facing, products. And look, the bottom line for us is we can't wait, and we think it's going to create tremendous opportunity, and economic development at a time, when that's exactly what the province and the country really, really needs.
Thank you, Benji. Stan, please.
Yep. Thank you, Brigitte, only because Benji teed me up so nicely, and I'm encouraged to hear you say that. I agree, and sort of my suggestions here at the Ministry of Finance is I keep going back to as light as touch as possible. Make it competitive, make it responsible, but make it competitive. Make the revenue share number also competitive. And Paul, I realize you don't like 50%. We hear you. It has to bring in the new entrants, but it also has to incent our existing establishments. And let's look at our land-based guys, for example, on the gaming side. I mean, they've been hit hard by this pandemic. We know that lots of jobs have been lost, capacity limits on the play. We want to make sure that they have a fair opportunity to enter this market. We also want to look to the job creators in Ontario. We are going to be, and all the data shows this, entering a significant boom period moving out of the pandemic. And our role here in government is to make sure that we don't lose talent to other jurisdictions, is that we have good job creators root here, have incentives to stay here. This is sort of a larger discussion about not just economic recovery, but economic growth, because we know every jurisdiction around the world will be competing for that edge, and Ontario needs to remain competitive. So Benji, those discussions are ongoing, and we know that there needs to be something done for those creating the jobs here as well. So it's sort of this multifaceted approach to making sure that we are competitive in every sense of that word.
Thank you so much, Stan. Yes?
Sorry, Brigitte.
Please, Paul.
Just want to add, and picking up a little bit of what Benji talked about for Ontario-based organizations, one of the suggestions we made to the AGCO in our submission with the feedback was finding a pathway for early stage companies and startups to licensing. One of the keys we've seen, and Ron knows this very well because there's been a great ecosystem in the Lower Mainland who have pursued licenses abroad, and Ron's seen it firsthand. And great companies who want to do business in Canada, but the pathway to license is hard. Doing business with lottery corporations is hard because of procurement rules and other things. So for early stage companies, having a marketplace where you can bring your product, you can get licensed in a graduated fashion, potentially, for early stage companies, maybe paying your fees in tranches as your business grows, helping with maybe an account representative type person to get you through the licensing process from the AGCO, because that's key. This is the marketplace where then if you can get a license and operate here, you can build your business from here. And that's really the plus. Even we suggested finding ways to beta new product live in market with support of the regulator. These are the kinds of things that will really flip the way of saying I need to be here, because we've been out as an association. Ron's been part of our events at London in the UK and ahead of ICE in partnership with the Canadian government at Canada House, trying to tell people that the Canadian story, because there's so many pieces already here, from the digital tax credits for development to our competitive tax base, our proximity to the US market, our depth of talent from coast to coast. It's phenomenal. And the last piece is this. This really will cinch the deal for many to say, I can actually set up here now. And that's what a lot of companies I'm talking to I've got their eyes open to that. And they're looking at what is going on. And that's key in trying to get this right. because that's the long-term success.
Thank you. So please, Ron, the floor is yours. I have a question that I would like you to consider afterwards. So please, Ron, if you can just be short about it.
Yeah, just quickly, I just want to bring to light what these emerging companies are about. I mean, these aren't operators necessarily. These are like, artificial intelligence companies, data analytics companies, split testing, conversion optimization, marketing, video production. It's the bleeding edge of our tech economy. It just happens to be focused on a gaming betting product, And I also, want to shed light on the fact that this is just one piece of the puzzle. And so if the province of Ontario can do some work around, issues to do with banking, it's hard for a company in the gaming industry to get a bank account. That's preposterous. This is a tax-paying, lawful entity that employs lots of people with great jobs, and they can't get a bank account. And, we have to jump through hurdles for financing too. Whether you're doing a private equity finance or you're doing a public listing, we're working on 3 public listings right now for gaming companies. Those respective regulators are still suspicious around the industry. So lots of broader work to do.
Thank you. So I have a last question for you to consider. It's very it needs some background here, but I'll have a go anyway. So we've been asked by a listener here, where does sports interaction fit into Ontario's planner as a First Nations socioeconomic initiative of the Mohawks of Kanawaki? That is a very, it takes some insight to answer that one. Paul?
I'll offer my opinion.
One, just wave your hands off.
I'm happy to do it. Listen, I think that Sports Interaction has built a very good business, and through the Mohawk Gaming Group and the team at Kanawaki have built a great business, and I see it as them being able to apply for a license in Ontario, just like anybody else can. Right. I think that the Ontario government, as they chose their eligibility, they went through the process and didn't say, well, we're going to pick this license, or this license. They took back an approach and said, we're going to meet eligibility standards based on your experience and your licensing. You'll be fit to start, but come and apply for a license, and everybody has to do that. And I think that's how I see it. I don't see anything different. The fact that they're an operating company, have successful business, and should be able to apply for a license and be judged on the merit of gaining that license. And I think that's really what we're trying to see in the marketplace. So,
right. Thank you so much. I think the time is more or less running out. So I think on a final note, I will give the word to you, Stan. So do you believe that the opening up of this iGaming market, is it realistic still to hope for December? Are you optimistic?
So yes, I'm optimistic, and my office was designed in 1968. So I have lots of wood to knock on in regards to some key moving parts that are in play at the moment. And as we saw on this wonderful discussion today, yeah, there's some more discussions to be had, some more work to be done. But those ingredients I talked about in mixing that cement are well underway. So there would be no reason for me to look at that timeline and say we wouldn't be on time. However, as I mentioned, it's a situation where we want a light touch framework to be announced, and we want to move through that and be adaptable. And so, it's on time, yes, but lots of work to be done, and everyone on this panel and everyone watching will have an opinion into how we move through that. So, looking forward to those discussions ahead.
Thank you very much, Stan. And I think we're done for today now. So I'm very grateful for the lively discussion we had, and thank you for also being so well prepared, all of you. You're professionals. So thank you, Stan, Ron, Paul, Shelley, Benji, for joining this panel today, and thank all of you listening in and asking us questions as well. So thank you very much indeed. It was an honor and a pleasure, and good luck to Ontario.
Thank you, Brigida. Bye, everyone.
Thanks so much.